which is, hi everyone. I'll start with that. Actually, we're recording this and we're putting it online. So if anyone doesn't want to have that or doesn't want to be in the image or something, either shut off your camera or just make sure you're not there. But it would be cool if we can put it online for other people. Welcome to the sixth, are we at the sixth, seventh even science chat? Means that we're already 7 weeks in curfews and not being able to go outside. But it's been quite a cool way to connect to people all the way around the world. So I'm quite excited to see you all here. And today we have some really cool scientists, I would say. Last week we had some activists more on the side of protecting rivers using science in a way, but you're the guys doing the science that should protect the rivers, right? I'm gonna give the stage to Jens to introduce you all.
Thank you, Vera. Well, like Vera said, we are going to talk now about like rivers and oceans. This time we have three NatGeo explorers, Andrej, Chloe, and Imogen. They are all like, Imogen is a marine biologist. She's doing or already finished her PhD, if I'm not wrong, and it's studying the source of plastic into the sea. Andrej is a pathobiologist and he works with sharks, which is also really interesting. And he also has experience with rivers, as far as I know. And Nunn is also a marine biologist, and she has worked like in many types of marine ecosystems. But I think the most important topic on today will be about like interconnection between ecosystems. And each one of them will briefly present their own work, like 5 minutes each. Then I will do some questions that I already have prepared, and then we will open the discussion for all of you to ask whatever you want to the explorers, and also to discuss about what you also know about this connection between rivers and oceans, which actually it's something that looks quite obvious, but it's in the latest studies it has been more understood yet now than ever, because until now each ecosystem was something in itself. So that's really interesting to know that everything is connected, and we are studying in that. So we could go first with Imogen and her presentation, then Chloe, and then Andrej, if that is okay for you. So you will share your screen with us, right, Imogen?
Okay, hang on a second. And hello, I don't think I've met most of you. My name's Imogen. I'm from the UK. Hope lockdown is going okay. I'm bored out of my mind, so I'm very much looking forward for it to be over. Let me just get my screen shared. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I've come into freshwater microplastics after my PhD. So for the first bit, I'm going to teach you or show you what I've done during my PhD research and just what I do in general. And then towards the end, I'll show you exactly what I'm doing with National Geographic, looking at plastic pollution in rivers. And the title really hits the nail on the head. My whole research is looking at plastic, and I've been best described as a plastic detective, where I've been investigating the not so obvious. So how is plastic getting into our oceans and getting into our rivers in ways that we didn't typically consider? So my first bit of research, which is at the top up here, is looking at facial scrubs. No one had done any research before looking at how many tiny microplastic bits called microbeads could be in facial scrubs. And they used to include microbeads in shower gels, facial scrubs, sometimes even shampoo, because it's aesthetically pleasing. You can color them so it looks nice. But for facial scrubs, it was used to get the dead skin off. It was like an abrasive, completely not needed because there's natural alternatives instead, such as sugar or salt. So they were really not needed in these facial scrubs in the first place. But no one had done research before looking at how many could be in one bottle, and that's exactly what we decided to do. It was the first research in my PhD. Spent a lot of time in the lab diluting facial scrubs down. It took me hours. I used to be into the lab until maybe like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes, going absolutely crazy, but the results were quite interesting. So for a typical facial scrub, if you can see my cursor, Up to 3 million pieces could be in one bottle. So on a squirt on your hand, there could be over 10,000. So you're washing your face with 10,000 microplastic pieces, which then go down the drain, potentially through the sewage treatment works, and then into our ocean, making it a big plastic soup. Plastic getting in there that we didn't consider. Long story short, we took this research to industry and governments around the world. Industry voluntarily removed microbeads from their products, and then the most exciting point was that internationally they became banned, they became illegal. And we went back a few years later and tested the same products, and all of them had been removed. So stopping millions of microbeads potentially entering the ocean, which was awesome. The next bit of research involved a lot of washing our clothes. I'm going to go over this very quickly, so if anyone has any questions, just send me an email or ask me at the end. But when we wash our clothes, plastic fibres can come off them. That's because most of the clothes that we wear are made out of plastic. This jumper is made out of polyester, for example. And when they're swishing and swirling around in the washing machine, these fibres can come off. Our research found that 700,000 fibres can come off your clothes in a typical clothes wash. Like the microbeads, they can go down the drain, potentially through the sewage treatment works and into our ocean. Now I'm working with National Geographic, and that's actually my grant, looking at different inventions that can try and capture the fibres in the washing cycle to stop our fibres, again, making the ocean into a big plastic soup. My most recent research, and we probably have to speak over this with a pint in a pub, it was the most controversial one yet, was looking at biodegradable and compostable plastics. We bury biodegradable and compostable bags in the soil, we submerged them in the sea, we left them hanging out outside, and we just watched how they broke down, what happened to them. And for the biodegradable bags, all of them were still in the environment after 3 years. So when I hear the word biodegradable, I'll assume that it breaks down like an apple or breaks down in a quick time frame. But this bag that I'm holding here had been in the ocean for 3 years. So it's creating this whole dialogue of, is biodegradable or compostable actually better? The compostable bags did disappear in the sea in quite a quick time frame, 3 months, but they were still there in the soil. So I'm working and wanting to work more with government and industry about how we can market things properly and realise that there is a need for them, but it has to be in the right waste management facilities. It can't be the natural environment, like a lot of us think. Zooming now across to the Gajić, that was all my PhD work. Now I'm a postdoc on the Sea to Source, National Geographic Sea to Source team, working with this wonderful bunch of people. I literally just left a call with them. And we've gone to the Gajić to understand a major river system from sea to source and look at plastic pollution. We've got a variety of different teams. My laptop will work. Okay, so we went from Bangladesh, this site is called Bola, so this is the closest to the ocean, all the way up to site 10, which is in the Himalayas near its glacial source. We're out there because plastic pollution is known as being very prominent in the Ganges River. It's also a very sacred river where they believe that it literally flows from a god. So it's very sacred, but at the same time, there's not much waste management system out there. And that's exactly why we decided to choose it, to see how polluted it was and how we can compare that against other rivers. So I'm going to zoom through these people as well. So this is the social economic team. They're understanding how people interact with plastic, what the community think that they can do to try and minimize plastic waste from entering the ocean, as this is very much their part of the world, so how we can try and help them. This is the land-based team. They've been going to landfill sites around the river, around different towns and cities, along those 10 locations, and looking at how waste is being managed, how it could be potentially getting into the environment. And then this is our team, we're the water team, and we've been investigating plastic pollutions in terms of fishing nets, and also looking at a whole 3D picture of the river, understanding where it goes. Is it settling into the sediments? Is it settling in from air, because plastic's in the air? And how much is in the water? And I'm starting to get some really exciting results about how much plastic is actually accumulating down a major river system, which would be the first of its kind. That's been a very quick whirlwind of my research, and I invite any questions. If we don't have time for questions, then just send me an email afterwards.
Thank you, Imogen. Now we will go with Chloe, and like I said, we will have like time for questions for everybody after the 3 presentations. But like Imogen also said, it's nice if you have any other discussion you want to have, you can also write the explorers and they can give us their contacts. So thank you, Imogen, and now it's Chloe's turn.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm just going to try and share my screen. I've got 2 screens here, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. We'll see. Is that working?
Not yet. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. You still see it? Is it a slideshow now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hang on. Let me just. I think I'm seeing something completely different. Give me a second.
Yeah, I know it's hard. Technology always conquers us.
Oh my god, I have too many tabs open here.
Just tap all the buttons, maybe you can get it.
Okay.
There you go.
Cool. So everyone can see this, right?
Cool. No, not yet. Come on, you're a millennial. You can do it. I think you got stuck. Unless you are smiling the whole time. Oh.
Hello.
Hello. We're still here.
I'm back. I have no idea what happened there. Try again.
Try one more time.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Excellent.
Yeah. I think yeah, perfect. There
okay. Cool. Yeah, so I have quite a diverse background. I studied oceanography for my undergraduate degree. So did a very like sciencey, chemistry, biology, physics, maths, that kind of thing for my undergraduate, and then I actually studied sustainability, so I went on to study like qualitative stuff, so the kind of social science aspects, and it was quite general, but I'm still interested in coasts, so where humans interact with the oceans. But I thought I'd just run quickly through my undergrad research. It actually comprised a very small part of a description of a new species. It hasn't been published yet, so I can't go into the details. And I don't know if anyone saw in the news, I think it popped up in the UK a while ago, but they recently described a deep sea species, and it took them like 82 years. So we'll see if this happens soon, but I'm not holding my breath for this to be published anytime soon. So essentially what you're looking at is an amphipod. Amphipods are a type of crustacean, so they have an exoskeleton. They're related to shrimp, lobster, crab, that kind of thing. And they're found in all of the oceans around the world, and they're found in fresh water as well. So they're found deep sea, coastlines, middle of the ocean, pretty much everywhere. And they range in size as well. So they can be smaller than a grain of rice, and they can also get like over the size of your hands, essentially, like over a foot long. This particular one is like the size of a grain of rice for context, so this is magnified very much so. And I dissected over 400 of these. It was a very long and tedious few months of doing this. But I was essentially looking to see whether they were male or female and taking some measurements so that I could work out how the population was composed. And this doesn't really sound like it's related to rivers, and what I personally was doing was not related to rivers, but researching deep sea species like amphipods is very related to rivers, and especially this species, or these samples specifically. They came from off the coast of Angola, and there are two major impacts to this ecosystem, I guess you could say. So one is the fact that it's an oil exploration site. So the benthic, or the seafloor ecosystems, are being impacted by disruptions where they're drilling for oil or gas. But it's also impacted by the river that flows off the coast of Angola. I think you can see here, and you can see that it's big enough to have an impact on the continental shelf. So basically the flow of water coming from this river creates this sea fan of sediment, and that like flow difference, I guess is a way of explaining it, also changes the topography of the sea floor. So it creates this ravine. And these ravines or canyons in the deep sea are really important for biodiversity and ecosystems because they funnel nutrients. So I'm sure you guys know that rivers accumulate lots of nutrients from the source to the sea, and those nutrients accumulate in these deep sea canyons when they flow off of the continental shelf. So they're hotspots for biodiversity, and amphipods are kind of like a keystone species, so they can indicate whether or not these ecosystems are doing well or not. So even though my research was much more focused on the details of one species, overall, when you fit it into like deep sea ecology, it's quite important that we understand these species and understand how their populations are composed so that we can continue to monitor them to work out what impacts changes upstream in rivers might have and what impacts humans might have directly in that area. So that's kind of where my undergraduate research fits. And recently, some of you might have seen in the news this. So there are, as I said, amphipods all over the world, every ocean, every layer of the ocean, including the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest point in the ocean. And researchers actually found a new species of amphipod, which they do quite frequently. But in this case, they found it at the deepest point of the ocean, and it already had plastic in it. So I think it's quite telling that the use of plastics in our day-to-day life are really ubiquitous across the oceans for us to discover a new species after we've already had such a significant impact on it is kind of crazy. And I think this is a really good link back into Imogen's work. You know, we don't really know where all of these plastics are coming from, and even though we might not live near the sea or near a river, they're still making their way into our waterways, into the ocean and into the deepest parts of the ocean, and are impacting things that we just haven't been able to study yet. I think that's one of the reasons why I find deep sea research so fascinating, because there is so little that we know about it, and it's more important than ever now to understand it so that we can kind of glimpse it before it might be gone. And I just wanted to touch on what I then went on to do. So completely different. Am I frozen? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. I just had a message pop up telling me that I might be disconnected.
All good.
So, yeah, so my research went in a completely different direction for my master's, and I actually travelled to Greenland to talk to community members about their relationship with the environment around them. So it had a much more social science focus, and it was completely different for me, very much subjective, not lots of tables of data, not lots of graphs. So it was quite challenging for me actually, because I'm much more comfortable with numbers, and speaking to people in a language I don't speak was a bit nerve-wracking to start with. And again, this wasn't directly linked to rivers, but I think Greenland is actually quite interesting because it holds so much of the world's water, and I think if it all melted, there are bound to be some rivers, certainly a lot of lakes on the Greenlandic landmass, and I think it will be interesting in the coming years to see what happens. And my plans going forward to do a PhD are to continue speaking with these community members and understanding better their relationships to the ocean specifically, but also the whole environment around them. And how they're coping with the melting ice there that is going to continue to expose the land, create different water features around their homes and environments. So yeah, that's what I do. I actually work as an environmental compliance advisor at the moment. I do really random things, but that's much more on like the policy side of things. So I kind of have an insight into, certainly in the UK, our waste systems. And obviously we have quite well-structured systems, and a lot of Europe does as well, but there are so many places in the world that don't, and there are still so many flaws in our own waste systems in developed countries as well. That's me.
Thanks, Chloe. That was a really nice presentation. We have lots of questions to discuss. I already have one question, and now Andrej is going to talk about his own investigations, research, and then we're going to do the discussion. Andrej, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I'm super delighted to be here with you today, guys. And in this time of coronavirus, and it's a difficult time, but I cannot do what I love the most, which is to be underwater and conduct scientific research. But I can still be with you here today to share some of bits and pieces of what we are doing. And as Jens told at the beginning, I'm a pathologist working on the understanding of the disease development caused by pollution. So unlike Imogen and other colleagues who are more working to find the source of plastic, I'm about to find out how exactly these plastics, war waste, heavy metals are affecting different marine life. And we also work on some river deltas and moats, so it's kind of connected of what are you doing. So let me share my screen. I got some slides for you prepared. Can you see it now?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. So it's being a biologist and pathologist who is studying the marine life always take you to many different places, and you're trying to give your best to understand something so you can protect it. Because I deeply believe that empathy is something that is driving us to protect the world around us. So the expeditions that we are taking all over the world, as I will show you on my next slide, we explore many different countries, many different continents, and especially my team at the National Geographic called Shark Tales is working on 4 continents at this point, and we are trying actually to make a links between these pollution and the disease they are causing. So at the very beginning, you get dressed and you get underwater, because that's how every study begins. We try to understand the different ecological patterns of the shark skates and rays and how they behave in different conditions. Then we also study the fisheries in that area. We conduct vast majority in the deep sea fisheries beyond 1,000 meters deep, but we also doing studies with the ROVs. We're trying to film the species in their natural habitat, try to understand more of their basic biology. And what is mostly important that we are trying to take samples from already dead bycatch species. As you can see, the 7-gill shark on my photo. It is very important approach because it's something we call zero stress approach for the animals. When we are underwater, we can almost measure the specimen, we can get into close interactions, we can feed sharks, we can feed skates and rays, we can observe them, take photos as we like, take eDNA samples without any stress for the animal. And on the shore or in the boat, we are able to take samples of the animal for further studies. There's a huge gap when it's come to the scientific understanding of the disease of free living sharks. And that's mostly because the sharks and all other animals as well are easily to decompose very quickly. So if you haven't fixed your sample in 15, not 50 minutes after that, then you're gonna lose your samples. So often we are forced to spend a lot of time with the fishermen at the boats and in very different conditions to get our samples. And once we go to the labs, we are trying to analyze a broad spectrum of the studies. So we do the X-rays, we do the CT scans, the actual tomography, we do molecular biology, we also do histopathology and immunohistochemistry, which is actually the most important part in order to understand these diseases. So, for example, when it's come to the mobile electric rays, as you see this juvenile on the photo, they sometimes contain over 100 pieces of microplastics in their guts, which is absolutely terrifying to see, because when you see such a small animal living on the sea bottom to have over 100 visible pieces of microplastics, it's something that actually makes you frozen when you watch it. And in order to understand the diseases it causes, we try to observe all of our specimens on many different shows. As you can see, this X-ray photo of stingray and of rock shark from the deep waters of the Eastern Adriatic pit. And at the end, there's most of the people are asking us is how the sharks, skates, and rays are connected to other vertebrates and the humans at the end. Well, most of the people will agree that they look quite different than most of the mammals, but when you look at these images that I took of the human fatty disease liver on the left and the normal shark liver on the right, you actually may notice that the inner structure, the histological structure of the organs, of the certain organs, is not quite different in all the vertebrates, which means if something is affecting other far better adapted species for certain raw conditions than we are, then it's quite terrifying what this can do to humans also. So what are we finding in these samples is quite bad. Over 98% of the study species actually suffered from severe changes in the liver, kidney, and the brain. Some of them were suffering from different inflammations in the midmetal gland, which are actually the shell glands who produce the vitellus for the embryos. And in most of the cases, as you can see here in the slide, I hope you see the slide, it's a healthy liver of a shark with a macrovesicular degeneration of the fatty tissue. And this is what happened when we take a different look on the liver. All over it, we see these diffuse inflammations, which are some sorts of hepatitis, probably caused by heavy metals from different wastewaters coming from the major rivers in the sea. And this is something that we are currently working on, but all studies populations had over 95% of these changes in their tissues. And this is a paper that is just in press, so it's not so good to discuss it, but I would like to say more because we actually, the Croatian military police sent us a sample of the cat sharks around Dubrovnik. And in these species were caught alive by illegal trawling, and when they're landed, they was unable to get them back to the sea, and they decided to donate it for further studies. And let me check, in 9 of 10 specimens we found severe changes, and most of them suffer from something not similar, but actually the same as the human meningitis, which is the inflammation of the meninges in the surrounding the brain. So this actually proves that we published over 50 papers, mostly based on similar studies, and this actually describes it how some animals such as sharks, skates, and rays with with extremely adapted immune system actually are suffering from pollution. And I think that is everyone's fault, and it is the latest time that we actually should take responsibility for it and actually change something. So that's it for my presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing screen, and I hope that you actually saw it. If you have any photos and everything you want to discuss with me, and if, as Imogen said, if you don't have time during this call, feel free to email me or get in touch with me anytime you like.
Thank you, Andrej. That was a really nice presentation with beautiful photos. Now we have a question that came from Jessica. She wanted to know, and that this question is for Chloe, which is the name of this amphipod species that was named after the plastic.
The plastic one. I think it was Erythenes plasticus. Plasticus was definitely the end of the name, and it's a Erythenes species of amphipod. I'm not sure if that was a bit in the middle. So it wasn't quite the same family as amphipods that I was studying, but they all look really similar, to be honest. I have to say. Yeah, and I mean, they found plastics in numerous other species as well. I'm sure if someone did that kind of study on the species I worked on, they'd find plastics in them as well. Yeah, like it's a given for almost any deep sea species that they will find something in there as well. My supervisor always brought out her examples of like Coke cans and stuff like that that they've got from trawls on the seafloor in some of the remotest parts of the world. It's crazy how far our waste can get. We just don't know
it. The other question I have is for Imogen about like the plastic pollution. You were studying in the case of the washing machine, but is there like already knowledge of which are the, I don't know if you said that, I didn't hear that you said that, like the main sources of plastic pollution that comes from river into the ocean?
So in most research, it's predicted that most of the fibres that we're finding in the river are from washing our clothes. That's because if you imagine for every wash, 700,000 fibres comes off. Now imagine that, how many times you wash your clothes per week, per month, per year, for a whole street, for a whole city, for a whole country. It's a huge amount of fibres. And these fibres, even if the wastewater treatment plant is effective, they can be up to 99% effective at removing plastic. But with the sheer quantity going through, it still means that thousands are ending up in the marine environment. But actually, they'll be ending up in the river because most wastewater treatment plants are connected to rivers. But another source of plastic fibres into river systems or marine systems is, even as we're just sat here, fibres are falling off our clothes. And I've got a friend that's done some research. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's thousands of fibres are coming off our clothes every hour. I'm going through my data at the moment for the Gajić trip, and 95% of them are plastic fibres. It's a big problem.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. We have already some questions here in the chat. I just have one last question to Andrej, and then we go to the questions in the chat. So Andrej, you were talking about these heavy metals and different pollutants that were affecting the biodiversity, the oceanic biodiversity. But I'm wondering, what about like a free-flowing river, a healthy free-flowing river? How does that relate, for example, with the same biodiversity? As far as I know, there are also like nutrients income, plankton that comes from the river into the ocean. That's also very important to this biodiversity. Do you know something about that you can maybe briefly explain to us, this important connection?
That's actually the rivers, especially the large rivers, give the huge influence on the entire marine ecosystems. For example, the Po River in Italy is influencing all the northern part of the Adriatic Sea. Not only the biodiversity, but it's changing entire the physical and the chemical composition in the marine sediments. So it's quite there's a more interesting. Sorry, it said the connection is bad. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yeah, you froze
Oh,
for a
perfect.
moment.
Perfect. There's an interesting sample that I would like to share with you. It's about the aluminum mining happening in Mostar. And after the aluminum mines open, the Neretva River actually changes its color. And the entire Neretvansky Bay, which is a large portion of the Eastern Adriatic Sea, actually changed the composition of the sediments, which actually caused a lot of endemic species to disappear and caused another one to conquer a new adaptive zones and niches. So it's something that is it's like everyday connection, because and especially the springs that are happening in the marine waters are affecting the diversity quite enormously way. But when you look at the rivers, and as the water is flowing all the time, for example, in smaller rivers in the Balkans, as you gents are interested in, its situation is quite bad here, because we have a couple of projects that my master students are conducting that I'm leading, which are related to actually post-war and radioactive elements in the rivers, which actually are surprisingly high. And we have, for example, the radioactive elements in certain areas of Bosnia, which are 7 times higher than they are allowed to be after the war here. And when you combine all of these influences, it is almost impossible to emphasize how big the influence are on from the rivers to the seas. You could speak about it for like ages.
Yeah, that's completely right.
Yeah, I could speak like 5 years about the influence of rivers. Don't know what to say specifically.
That's a really long Zoom meeting, 5 years Zoom meeting. There's a question from Dilena to Chloe about the fish you were talking about, no, the species you were talking about. Can you give us a little sneak peek in their ecology? Chloe?
She doesn't want to give us any information. She's
No, she's not in the mood for questions today.
Is she frozen or what?
Yeah, she's frozen probably.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can leave that for later. There is a question for Imogen from Bernhard. He asked if in the Gajić project, did you also look if plastics accumulate in different trophic stages? Or is it more about quantifying how much plastics goes into water?
So I was purely focusing on microplastics in that whole 3D model, looking at plastic in the air, the sediment, and also the water. But my friend, Emily Duncan, was looking at plastic that had been ingested, and also looking at different fish markets, the gape size of fish, and then corresponding that with the research that I've done, looking at different sizes of plastic to see what's the probability of it being ingested, but not direct trophic transfer yet. But we've got some ideas floating around of how we could do that.
Thanks. Chloe is telling me that her Zoom crashed and she comes back in a moment. Now there is another question from Vera. Do you wanna do the question, Vera?
I can do it myself. Yeah, I'm quite curious, especially Imogen, you've been talking quite a bit about your research having impact into actually changing things, right, to getting laws. How do you do this? Like, how do you start? How do you make sure that science actually reaches policy?
It's a good question. And I guess it depends on what country you're from, but if I can use the microbead one as like a kind of a case study, I never predicted it either. It was my first study, but it definitely showed me the ropes of what I would do in the future. One is a good platform going. So people got so angry about microbeads being in facial scrubs, and it's completely not needed, and that they weren't having that dialogue with companies, that they knew what they were buying. So first of all, people started to boycott the products and go for natural products instead. That got a whole media stir going. And from that media stir, we put in evidence to our government. And then at government level, it got discussed as evidence and then influenced the banning of microbeads and facial scrubs. So I would say get people on board, and 2, you can actually submit your research or your ideas a discussion point. It doesn't actually have to be science as evidence to government. They can put out calls for proposals. So we just submitted some research evidence based on the bag paper that I showed you. And you just have to wait a little bit of time to see where it goes. But use official channels and also social media. But if you want any help with it in the future, I'll be more than happy to Zoom you and discuss the pros and cons of both processes.
Yeah, cool. Can I ask a bit, like my second question yet?
Yeah, go for it.
Because it kind of leads from this, right? Like you also said about involving communities and talking to them about how to change this plastic waste and stuff. But I always have the feeling a bit that tackling plastic is, in a sense, an easy one because everybody would be against. Do you also like look at the broader science of or aspects of river management in that sense? And do you think, like, is it feasible to combine those?
I think definitely. I mostly I do just focus on plastics, but it's a big discussion point that is plastics, for example, taking away attention on climate change, when climate change and global warming is a way bigger issue. It just is. Plastics is actually solvable. It's a fantastic material. It's incredible at what it does. It's definitely not a bad material. It's what we do with it and how we dispose of it, which is an issue. And that means that we can change how we're interacting with it to stop it getting into the river system. So I hope that we can use plastic as a gateway and as a tool to teach people that you can be environmental, and even a small change can have a huge impact. I mean, you know, washing your clothes less often could stop thousands of microfibers entering the river. So even though on this trip, the Sea to Source trip, we aren't directly talking about other ways that we could deal with river management, it could be a really interesting follow-up piece of how we could do it.
Cool, thanks.
Cool.
I'm really impressed by the three of you, actually.
Elena, Chloe is back. Maybe you can make your question to her.
Oh yeah. So I was just thinking. I'm curious about the species that you described. So just give us a sneak peek about its ecology, like a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know tons about it, to be honest, because these descriptions are broken down into so many aspects. So the species were actually collected over a decade ago, like 15 years ago. So yeah, already a long process. Someone will do genome stuff, someone will do like the microbiology, looking at its gut, looking at its internal structures. Someone will do like physiological studies, so drawing it accurately, measuring it accurately. So my part of the study was trying to work out like how many males and females you'd expect to find in the species in a certain location, and then its reproductive method, essentially. So for every species, I was looking not just at whether it was male or female, but also how old it was, essentially. And one of the coolest things I thought about my research was actually the way that we can determine how it probably reproduces just based on like how many males and females you'd expect to find. And it's a lot more complicated than I initially thought. So essentially it comes down to how the specimens are collected as well. And I didn't personally, someone else did, lowered a trap to the sea floor, left it there for 24 to 48 hours. They baited it with tuna, something like that, collected it, and then looked through their sample. So obviously they didn't just have this species of amphipod, they probably had lots of species of amphipod, lots of other small creatures that scavenge for small fish that are dead on the seafloor. But basically we can work out how likely it is for a species to either reproduce, or for a female to reproduce once in their lifetime and produce many, many offspring and then die, or to reproduce multiple times but produce fewer each time. So basically, if a species reproduces multiple times, you'd expect mature females to be at that trap looking for food. But if a species only reproduces once, then they probably gorge themselves before they reproduce and then don't feed afterwards. So you would never find mature females at a trap like that. So essentially I was looking to see if there were mature females there or not. I didn't find any. I'm sure you can link the dots there without me having to say it. But it was also interesting because there were no males. And we think that's probably because the males avoid food falls in general. Don't know whether it's like a reproductive thing or predatory. So if there's a food fall, it's more likely to attract small organisms, predators. So it might be that the males spend more time like in the open ocean, whereas the females spend more time on the seafloor, that kind of thing. But yeah, that's essentially what I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I had 2 males in 418 specimens.
Ooh, okay. That's interesting.
Or I did a terrible job of sexing them.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. Francie just made a really good question, which is aimed to you three, which is related to how to use science as a tool to shape decision makers' process. And how do you yourself do that in your own work? Maybe we could start with Andrej, then go with Imogen, and then Chloe, because I think this question addresses you all.
So the question is how our scientific research is related to policy making.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect. Because the vast majorities of our studies are actually designed in order to protect certain species and habitats. So in last 5 years, together with the European Environmental Agency, we are conducting some regional work that we are trying to actually make unique protection for certain species and habitats, or let's say entire northern Mediterranean Sea. And it is something actually that is quite hard to achieve for a scientist. As Imogen mentioned like a couple of minutes before, it is something that you have pushed on many different sides. For example, we are pushing it towards a lot of media work. We do documentaries, we do newspaper articles, we do guest appearances on national television for almost 2, 3, or 4 times a month discussing these issues. And also we are pressing it because we are trying to prove how certain species or habitats, we are trying to predict what is the worst case scenario for this species. And through our scientific papers, we are trying to actually discuss it with the colleagues from all over the world that are helping us to reach to the government. And even when we reach the government and because there are a couple of laws that I was involved in the writing, and after they was voted for, there still was actually a dead letter, nothing more, because there's no actually any legal body which will be actually maintain these laws in the Balkans. I mean, it's all the same situation. I think that other parts of undeveloped world is quite the same, and it is like the policy go in one direction and the science usually go in completely different, and quite hard to on the same side. But I think that Imogen might or Chloe might know better to say.
Thanks, Andrej. What do you have to say about this, Imogen?
So science for decision making, I completely agree with what Andrej just said. But for me, science is the foundations and the background and the story of everything. So science should then be the formation of how things go forward. You know, the world is always changing. We've got new issues, we've got new challenges. So I hope that in the future, governments and industry use scientists more to make effective decisions. For example, with my National Geographic grant, we're testing different inventions that aim to capture fibres in the washing cycle. Some products are pretty, but they're not as effective as other products. We've got one product that's nearly 100% effective, and then another product that's 20% effective. They're trying to get legislation into government to make some of these products a necessity in washing machines. But if we've done the research and we're saying that they're not, then they should listen to the research. Otherwise, it's just, you know, money making and marketing without actually consulting science first. And if you want the world to go forward in a healthy and progressive manner, science has to be informed.
That was a really short and nice answer. And what about this topic, Chloe? Have you worked in this?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't directly work on policy for my deep sea ecology project, but when I was kind of looking into the background of my type of work, I guess you could say, kind of looking at sustainability with deep sea ecology, I discovered that in Angola, the gas and oil companies regulate gas and oil exploration, which seems a bit backwards to me. It's a good sign that they did a baseline study, and that's how I got my specimens. But the fact that the gas and oil companies are driving the process of exploring and regulating that exploration means that it's based off of them wanting money rather than them being genuinely interested in what's down there and the possibility that it might be a complete tragedy to drill there. And I think in countries like that, it's really difficult to make that change. Like, they had a civil war in the last couple of decades.
Oops.
Of environmental regulation. Oh, did I freeze?
No, you're back.
No, okay. Yeah, so in places like Angola, it's clearly really difficult to make that change. And you kind of, yeah, it's a long process. I mean, in terms of what I do now, I don't actively work with policymakers, but I work with the legislation that is in place, helping customers comply with it. And it's interesting to see the different types of companies that come through. Some of them, it's really just a tick box exercise. They're like, yep, we make this much plastic packaging a year, we'll tell you, we'll pay for it, and that's as far as we'll go. And then some other companies really do want to do their best. They want to make a change. They want to understand more about their data. They want to know, you know, if we change this component of this piece of packaging, what difference is that going to make in the environment, in our savings, how recyclable it is, whether or not we can make packaging out of recycled materials, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see those differences in businesses, and it's also interesting to see the challenges, even for companies that really want to do their best. They're big companies, there are lots of levels of management, so the people who are maybe looking at legislation in terms of plastic packaging might not be in the same team as the people who are actually creating the packaging or doing the things that the packaging technologists might be doing with plastic. And it's expensive to change your manufacturing, things like that. So there are so many challenges that get in the way of businesses making change, even if they do want to do good. But I think what has become abundantly clear is that the government could do more to make it easier for people to change, not just individuals, but companies as well.
Thanks, Chloe. I think we have the last question from Martin. You could do it yourself, Martin, and then we are on time already. So, Martin, are you there? Martin? Okay. Martin is not there, I don't know, but I will read his question. This is to Imogen. So according to you, plastics originating from litter and breakdown of bigger plastic waste particles is only a minor source of the plastic pollution. Is there a prognosis on how to break down of a bigger particles will crisp? Can you read it? Because it's a bit confusing when I read it. It's down there in the chat, Imogen, please.
Bear with me.
Okay, hey, sorry, just, yeah, I can read it out eventually.
but
So
you
I'm
better
back here.
make the question. It was a bit
So
confusing.
yeah, Imogen, you said that the biggest source of plastic pollution right now in our food chain was from microplastics originating from laundry washing and stuff. But our oceans are also full of litter and plastic, like bigger plastic particles, talking bottles, bags and stuff. And is there like any prognosis on how the breakdown of those bigger particles will increase microplastic pollution within the coming years as well?
Okay, got you. So yeah, there's two sources of microplastic. There's microplastic that's been made to be that size. That's called primary microplastic. I actually, bear with me, I'm in my spare room, so I have some examples. Where is it? Okay, so then in here, these are the microplastics. So this would have like 3 million in one bottle. These have been made to be that size, so they're called primary microplastics. Then we have a bottle. This is just a bottle I found on a beach. Can you see it's kind of fragmenting? You can like pull bits off. It's just so brittle because it's been in the sun. So that's called secondary microplastics. If we stopped all plastic from entering the oceans and the rivers now, microplastic would still increase because of all of the other bits of plastic in the ocean. So I would say from all of the other bits of plastic that's in the ocean, like bottles, this is probably of equal concern because this bottle could fragment into millions of plastic bits. Yes, it will do it slowly, like layer on layer, but it's still going to be another source of microplastics. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Imogen. I think this was a really interesting chat. We had like really different disciplines, but studying the same phenomena. Just for you to know, there are many studies ongoing on this topic. For example, lately it has been discovered that salmon that comes from the ocean goes to the river, and then it's an income from the ocean to the land from nitrogen. So there are really interesting new connections that ecologists are starting to understand. And I think that this was just a bit to give a brief idea of that connection in this science chat, and also to understand that we are polluting and these connections. So thank you, Imogen, Andrej, Claude. Those were really good presentations, really nice answers. And we are looking forward to see what are you going to do next in your researches. And also you could maybe share with us your emails down here in the chat. If somebody has a further question, they can write you personally. And also Vera wants to give a little message about our river conservation camp.
Yeah, thanks, Jens, and thanks to the three of you. It was really, really cool to see some cool research how it goes. I hope to be seeing you guys in Montenegro in a few months. And I want to just say a little message about that, because with the River Collective team, we're working on organizing the next Students for Rivers camp. Gonna happen in September, hopefully. And we're opening applications this week, so we kind of need all your help to share it around and to get some students motivated to come. And about next science chat, it's super linked, because actually Denis, he's also here, I see, and Danilo, two guys from Montenegro, who we're going to visit, who are locally defending their rivers. That's kind of the people we're going to visit, and together with them talk about how to defend rivers and how to defend those rivers specifically, and how like many disciplines are linked to river conservation. And it's also thanks to Jens's cosmic networking that you guys are here, but he's also going to get a lot of interesting people into the camp, I think. So it's going to be a super cool week. We're going to be able to get on the river. We're going to be able to go to the Tara Fest, and this Tara Fest is like a kayak festival that's at the end of the week, and everyone is invited. And I think also you three are kind of planning to come, also Inuit, right? And everyone that joined last year's camp should be coming. So I'm just really excited. We're opening up applications within this week. We had a bit of problems with our hosting page of the website. So yeah, make sure you follow us on either Facebook, you can follow our newsletter so you get the news, and then hope to see you in Montenegro. Thanks all for joining today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.